language as, a river.
Right, it's fluid.
Yeah, it's messy, it drifts, it constantly evolves. You trace a word back through centuries of Latin and Greek and English, and you expect this beautiful, fluid evolution of human communication.
You expect a natural progression.
Exactly. But what if we have been reading ancient texts entirely wrong? What if the names embedded in these documents aren't actually words in the traditional sense, but rigid mathematical equations?
Which is a pretty wild thought for most people. You're right out of the gate.
It really is. And today, we are opening a stack of sources that suggest exactly that. We're doing a deep dive into the orthography of the name and the Salvation Mirror. And these sources present a framework where the linguistic landscape isn't fluid at all.
No, it's not. It's highly structural.
Right, it's structural, it's architectural. And to understand it, you, the listener, have to completely ignore how ancient words sound to your modern ear.
Yeah, you basically have to strip away thousands of years of phonetic habits. The central argument across these source materials is that the ultimate truth of an ancient text is, well, it's not found in its pronunciation.
Because pronunciation changes, right?
Oh, constantly. Pronunciation is a cultural artifact. It changes depending on geography, on the century, even just the shape of the speaker's mouth.
Right.
The truth, according to this framework we're looking at, is strictly orthographic. It's
Okay.
in the raw letter count. You literally just count the letters.
Which sounds so counterintuitive because, our entire educational system is built on phonetic sounding things out.
Exactly. Hooked on phonics, right.
Yeah, exactly. But the text begins with a very rigid premise that it calls the law of custody. So let's establish what exactly we are taking into custody here.
We are taking the original letter witness into custody. The fundamental rule of this entire architecture is that the original letter witness must be counted and secured before any inherited spelling or, later vocalization is allowed to speak.
That comes first.
Right. That is the first act of truth. A later language, whether that's English, Latin, Greek, or even the Masoretic Hebrew vowel pointing that developed way later in the Middle Ages, might do a lot of things to an ancient word.
You might try to preserve it,
It
right?
might try. It might accidentally distort it. But mostly, it frequently expands its form to make it easier for a new population to physically pronounce.
Oh, okay.
But the law of custody dictates that a later language cannot retroactively alter the original spelling.
So if a scribe wrote down 2 Hebrew letters 3,000 years ago, it literally doesn't matter if 10 centuries later, a different culture needs 5 letters to replicate the sound of those two.
Correct. 2 letters remain 2 letters.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more because I was thinking about this. And it's basically like looking at the ones and zeros of a computer's source code instead of looking at the user interface.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because the UI, that's the later language. It changes based on your operating system, your preferences, whatever the current design trends are.
Yeah, the Greek or the English translation is just the UI dressing up the data. It's making it accessible to the user.
Exactly. But the underlying binary code, the raw ones and zeros, that is the original letter count,
Mm-hmm.
it remains exactly the same no matter what the interface is doing on the screen.
It has to, otherwise the program breaks, and that structural reality provides an immense amount of clarity when you're dealing with ancient texts.
Because things get so muddy.
So muddy. We are constantly navigating information overload. I mean, you have translations layered on top of cultural traditions, layered on top of regional dialects. Finding the bedrock can feel totally impossible.
Yeah.
But there is a stabilizing relief in returning to the foundational building blocks. You just don't argue about accents, you count the letters.
And when you apply that strict law of custody to the most significant element in these texts, which is the divine name, the architecture really begins to reveal itself.
It does, it snaps into focus.
So let's apply it. If we were just counting letters, what is the source code of the name according to this text?
The name begins at a specific, mathematically locked 2-letter foundation. Yod and He, 2 letters.
Wait, not the 4-letter tetragrammaton that dominates like all historical discussions?
Well, it's important to clarify, the source material does not deny the existence or the usage of the 4-letter form,
Okay.
but it makes a very specific architectural distinction. It isolates Yod-He as the foundational custody point. And to understand why, we have to look at the letter value correspondence used throughout the source.
Right, the letter math.
Exactly. Yod corresponds to the letter I, specifically the Greek iota. He corresponds to A, the alpha. So the raw 2-letter structural foundation is IA. IA.
But anytime someone brings up the divine name, the immediate cultural reflex is to debate pronunciation. I mean, we're conditioned to hear Ya or
Yeah.
Cha or
Russia.
Yahoo.
Oh, shit.
Those are the sounds that have been passed down forever.
But the source aggressively dispels that pronunciation reflex. It points out that ya or ja are inherited transliteration traditions. Going back to your allergy, they belong to the user interface, not the source code.
Okay, so they're the UI.
Right. And to prove that IA is the recognized historical witness, the text brings in testimony from the 5th century. It references a figure named Theodoret of Cyrus.
Let's look at Theodoret, because why does his testimony matter in a debate about ancient Hebrew letter counts?
Well, Theodoret was a bishop, a theologian, and a historian living in Syria. He was uniquely positioned geographically and historically to document the living traditions of both the Samaritan populations and the Jewish populations in late antiquity.
So he was kind of right there in the middle of it.
Exactly. He documented oral traditions that hadn't yet been fully homogenized, and his testimony preserves a critical distinction in how different groups treated the name.
What exactly did he record?
He recorded that the Samaritans pronounced a longer 4-letter equivalent, which he transliterated into Greek as Ayabi or Yabi,
Okay.
but he explicitly noted that the Jews, who were the custodians of the strict Orthodox textual tradition, pronounced Aya, iota alpha. Yeah, and modern scholars acknowledging Theodoret's records confirm this distinction. You have the Samaritan IAB versus the Jewish Ea witness. The correspondence is unbending. The Greek iota alpha perfectly mirrors the Hebrew yod-he. Ia equals yod-he.
So the historical record actually backs up the two-letter witness.
Yeah.
But how does the source material anchor this structurally in the Hebrew text itself? Because if we're claiming this is a strict architecture, it needs a foundation in the ancient documents, right? Not just in the 5th century commentary.
Absolutely. The framework anchors this by placing two specific passages of scripture side by side to create a definition.
Okay, what are they?
It starts with Proverbs 18.10. The Hebrew phrasing is Migdal Hashem, YHWH. The standard English translation is, the name of YHWH is a strong tower.
I've heard that one.
Right, it's very famous. But the text emphasizes the grammar here. It does not say YHWH is a strong tower. It creates a distinct structural entity out of the word name.
It sets the name apart as a specific identifiable structure, literally the tower.
Yes. And then the source cross-references that with Psalm 68, which contains the phrase Be'ashimo. Translated literally, it means in Ia is his name, or by Ia is his name.
Oh, wow. So
Mhm.
Proverbs says the name is the tower, and Psalm 68 explicitly identifies that name form structurally as Yod-He-Ia.
The precision of the argument is crucial here. Ia is the power. It is the architectural baseline.
Okay, I see.
If we are going to reconstruct the mathematical reality of these ancient texts, Ia is the anchor point from which everything else must be measured.
That makes a lot of sense.
And once that anchor is set, the text immediately explores how this divine baseline physically attaches to human identity and memory.
Right, so if the foundation of this architecture is established, how do you build on it? The source moves the concept of a memorial. It points to Exodus 3.15.
Yeah, Exodus 3.15 is the exact moment where the text explicitly joins the name to the mechanism of human memory.
How so?
The passage gives two parallel statements standing together as a perpetual decree. God says, "This is my name forever," and immediately pairs it with, "And this is my memorial to all generations." The name and the memorial.
Okay, let's break down the word memorial in the original Hebrew, because the English word carries, a lot of passive baggage.
It really does.
When we say memorial, we think of like a bronze plaque on a bench or a nostalgic feeling. It's a weak memory.
But the Hebrew root used in Exodus is zakar. It's spelled zayin kaf resh, ZKR. If you consult standard lexicons like Strong's Concordance, zakar translates to remember, to mention, or to recount.
Right.
But the primitive root, meaning the original physical action behind the word, is defined as to mark so as to be recognized.
To mark so as to be recognized. That is an active physical process. It's not a fleeting thought. It's the act of constructing a permanent monument.
Exactly. It is recognition permanently preserved in a structure. It is the ZKR root. And the source takes this physical memorial root, ZKR, and applies the rigid letter count rule to the human name, Zechariah.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's count the letters. In Hebrew, Zechariah is spelled Zayin Kaf Resh Yud He. 5 letters.
ZKRIA. If you divide it according to the components we've just established, it is a literal equation. Zayin Kaf Resh plus Yod He, ZKR plus IA.
ZKRIA. It perfectly equals IA remembers or Memorial of IA.
It's mathematically perfect. Standard lexicons entirely agree that Zechariah is formed from the root Zakar plus the divine name element.
Now, I know there are variations, right?
Yes, there are longer variant spellings in the manuscripts that add a wa at the end, but the foundational spelling being analyzed here is strictly the 5 letters ZKR plus IA, and what it represents is undeniable. By root and by letter, the name is an orthographic monument.
Just think about what it meant to walk around with a name like that in the ancient world. I mean,
Yeah.
for you listening, think about it. Today, naming conventions are largely aesthetic. We pick a name because it flows nicely or, it belonged to a relative.
Simple label.
Right, it's just a label. But ZKRA is not a label. It physically contains the structural root of the divine memorial ZKR welded directly to the divine source code IAA. It is the architectural embodiment of Exodus 3.15, walking around on 2 legs.
It fulfills the mandate, the name and the memorial bound together in 5 letters.
So if ZKR acts as the structural monument for memory, what happens when the text needs to construct a concept like rescue or deliverance? How does salvation physically attach to this math?
To answer that, the source examines one of the most structurally profound names in the text, Isaiah.
Okay, let's look at Isaiah.
The Hebrew spelling for Isaiah under examination consists of 5 letters, Yod, Shin, Ayin, Yod, He.
And by the letter value correspondence rule we talked about, that gives us ISA, IA, IAA.
Let's apply the exact same mathematical breakdown we used for Zechariah. We isolate the primary root. The first 3 letters are Yod, Shin, Ayin, YSA. In Hebrew, this is the root Yasha.
And what does Yasha represent?
According to Strong's H3467, Yasha means salvation, deliverance, rescue, to bring to safety. So the root Isa represents salvation.
And attached to the end of that ISA root is the exact 2-letter source code we established earlier. IA, Yod He.
The equation is perfectly balanced again. ISAA equals ISA plus IA, salvation plus IA, salvation of IA or IA saves.
That math is incredibly clean, but this is exactly where the modern user interface completely obscures the ancient source code. Because if you look up Isaiah in almost any English Bible, it does not look like a 5-letter word.
Not at all.
It is spelled ISAIAH. There is an H at the end of the word.
That English H is a phantom letter. It is a total illusion created by centuries of Latin transliteration.
Where'd it come from?
Well, when Jerome and later European scholars were trying to represent Hebrew words in Latin script, they struggled with how to convey the final Hebrew letter, he. To force a phonetic breath at the end of the word for European readers, they tacked on an H.
Oh, so it was basically just a pronunciation guide.
Exactly. And English Bibles inherited that tradition. But remember the law of custody. The original letter witness must be counted before the inherited spelling is allowed to speak.
Right, so the Hebrew spelling is strictly 5 letters, Yod, Shin, Ayin, Yod, He. The final He is already the 5th letter, which corresponds to the alpha, the A.
Yes.
English translators don't get to double count that final letter just to satisfy modern pronunciation rules.
You cannot retroactively inject a 6th letter into a 5-letter ancient structure. The original witness is strictly Isaiah. It is not Isaiah with an H. It is not Isaias. It is not Yesha. It is Isaiah.
It's rigid.
The rule is as strict as the math demands. If we allow that phantom English H to remain, we are fundamentally corrupting the original architecture.
Okay, I follow the logic on dropping the English H. It's a later addition. It's not in the Hebrew text. But if we are being this strict about counting letters, what do we do with a word that actually has an extra letter in the original Hebrew?
What do you mean?
Because there is a variation of this name in the text Yeshahu, Yod, Shin, Ayin, Yod, He, Wa. It has a physical 6th letter, a Wa, at the end. And if you look at a standard lexicon, like Strong's H3470, it groups the 5-letter Isaiah and the 6-letter Yeshayahu under the exact same entry. It treats them as identical.
Right, they are grouped together.
So doesn't that invalidate the strict letter count rule? I mean, does a 6th letter really matter if the dictionary says they mean the same thing?
It's the natural objection, but it conflates 2 entirely different linguistic disciplines. When a lexicon groups the 5-letter Isaiah and the 6-letter Yeshayahu under the same entry, it is making a semantic classification statement. It is not making an orthographic identity statement.
Walk me through that. Explain the difference between classification and orthographic identity.
A classification statement organizes words by their semantic family. It says, these words are related in meaning, they share a common root, they belong in the same conceptual bucket.
Okay, sure.
It is like a biological taxonomy grouping a caterpillar and a butterfly under the same species heading. They are fundamentally related. But an orthographic identity statement demands that they share the exact same physical, structural sequence of letters.
Ah, I see.
A lexicon can group related forms together for the convenience of the reader, but a lexicon does not have the power to make the physical sixth letter, the wa, vanish from the parchment.
So the dictionary is organizing the concepts, but we are inspecting the raw code.
Exactly. The mathematics of orthography are unforgiving. 2 letters are not 3, 5 letters are not 6.
Right.
The 5-letter form, ISAI, ends cleanly in the 2-letter divine source code, IA. The 6-letter form, Yeshayahu, ends in Yod-Heh-Wah. IA is not Yod-Heh-Wah. You cannot import a 6th letter into a 5-letter architecture and pretend the structure hasn't changed.
If that physical sixth letter, the wa, actually changes the structure, we need to understand mechanically what that letter is doing. We need to see how the wa operates when it's placed inside one of these equations.
And to demonstrate the mechanical function of the wa, the source examines the architecture of the name Joshua.
Let's strip away the English transliteration on that one too. In English, we see Josh. But what is the raw Hebrew spelling?
The Hebrew spelling for Joshua is 5 letters. Yod-Heh-Wah Shin-Ayin.
Okay, look at the first 2 letters. Yod-Hey.
It is the exact 2-letter baseline we started with, IA.
Yep.
The name Joshua literally begins with the divine source code.
Wow.
Then it is followed by the sequence Wa-Shin-Ayin. So the complete structural sequence is Yod-Heh-Wah Shin-Ayin.
We have IA at the front and Shinai in the salvation root at the back. But right in the middle, splitting the architecture, is that physical wa.
How does the wa function linguistically here? Because, standard modern grammar usually treats a wa as a vowel placeholder, right? Like an O or a U sound.
Standard modern grammar treats the wa as a meterlectionis, which translates to mother of reading. Because ancient Hebrew did not have written vowels, scribes eventually began using certain consonants, like wa, to help readers know what vowel sound to make.
Right.
Later vocalization systems, like the Masoretic points we talked about, permanently associated the wa with an O or U sound. But the source material insists that we cannot impose a medieval vocalization system onto a Paleo-Hebrew structure. We have to look at the ancient functional purpose of the letter itself. What was its functional purpose in Paleo-Hebrew?
In the ancient pictographic script, the wa was literally drawn as a peg or a tent hook. Linguistically, it acted as a grammatical connector. It is a hook.
Mechanically, what does a hook do inside a word?
Think about the physical nature of a hook. A hook does not invent a new object out of thin air. It binds things together. It hooks back to something that is already present.
Yeah.
In a phonetic sequence, when a wa acts as a hook, it doesn't suddenly invent a new U sound from nowhere. It hooks back to the primary vowel sound that initiated the immediate sound unit.
Okay, let's walk through the exact mechanics of this hook-back rule on the sequence for Joshua. Yod-Heh-Wah Shin-Ayin.
The sound unit initiates with the yod, the I. It is followed by the breath of the hey, the so the sequence begins with I. When the sequence hits the wa, the hook it catches and loops back to the initiating vowel of that unit. It hooks back to the yod, the I.
So we have yod, which is I, which is A. The wa hooks back to the yod, the I. Then we have shin, which is S, and ayin, the A.
I-A-I-S-A.
I-A-I-S-A. So the implication here, look at the math we just completed. If we put the decoded name of Isaiah next to the decoded name of Joshua, we get a perfect structural reflection.
This is what the source defines as the salvation mirror. The spelling of Isaiah is ISII. The spelling of Joshua is IISA.
It's an absolute mirror. They are built from the exact same structural components, but they are inverted.
Isaiah is the salvation root, ISA, followed by the divine name, IA, ISA plus IA. It conceptually translates to the salvation of IA.
Right.
Joshua is the divine name, IA, placed first, carrying the salvation root, ISO, forward, IA plus IS. It conceptually translates to IA enacts salvation or IA brings salvation.
The symmetry is staggering. Isaiah and Isa. And it's the mechanical function of the wa acting as a phonetic hook that acts as the pivot point for the entire mirror.
And this mechanical rule completely validates the argument against the 6-letter Yeshayahu form. The source applies this exact same hookback wa test to the ending of Yeshayahu to prove the math.
Let's run the test. Yeshayahu is 6 letters. Yod Shin Ayin Yod Hiwa. The final 3 letters are Yod Hiwa.
Apply the hookback rule to that terminal unit. The unit initiates with the yod, the I. It is followed by the he, the A. Then it hits the wa. The wa hooks back to the initiating I.
So the ending sequence is IAI. Therefore, the full 6-letter sequence of Yeshayahu becomes ISAI. A-I-A-I. Yes.
A-I-A-A-I. Even when you grant the dissenter the ancient hookback mechanics, Yeshayahu still fundamentally fails to match the pure five-letter ISAI structure.
That is wild.
The physical sixth letter does not disappear into the ether just because a dictionary grouped the words together. It adds a mathematical return. ISAI is not Isaiah. The architecture holds up.
Of the logic loops back on itself and locks every door. It's an airtight mathematical proof. But all of this math, the roots, the letter values, the Paleo-Hebrew hooked, all exists strictly within the Old Testament Hebrew language sandbox.
True.
What happens to this strict law of custody when the text jumps out of Hebrew and crashes into the Greek world of the New Testament? We can't apply Paleo-Hebrew spelling rules to a fundamentally different linguistic family.
The source recognizes this boundary, which leads to the final major structural test, the Greek boundary law. And the primary case study it uses to demonstrate this law is the city of Philadelphia.
Okay, Philadelphia is explicitly Greek. The word is Philadelphia. Strong's Greek 5359 defines it as brotherly love. It has absolutely zero etymological connection to the Hebrew roots we've been discussing.
None at all.
So how can the source possibly justify looking for the Hebrew IA source code inside a purely Greek word?
Well, the source is entirely transparent about this. It does not argue that Philadelphia possesses a secret Hebrew origin. It is a Greek word. However, Philadelphia does not enter this mathematical architecture because of its etymology. It enters the architecture strictly because of its assigned scriptural function in the text of Revelation.
How does Revelation define its function?
In Revelation chapter 3, the text addresses the church in Philadelphia and gives it a highly specific, unique commendation. It says, "You have kept my word and have not denied my name."
Have not denied my name. It explicitly links the city to the custody of the name.
That is the name custody testimony. The book of Revelation assigns Philadelphia the explicit spiritual function of holding the name securely. According to the source's framework, that assigned function legally activates the search for the name witness within the orthography of the word itself.
Okay, the function provides the legal right to search for the code. But we still have a major spelling problem here. The Greek boundary law. Philadelphia, in Greek, ends in epsilon iota alpha, EIA.
Right.
If the target code is strictly IA, how do you mathematically justify ripping the IA out of an EIA ending without violating the law of custody?
This is the genius of the boundary law. The law does not state that you can carelessly slice IA out of any Greek word that happens to end in similar letters.
That would just be cherry picking.
Right. The law states that the terminal witness IA can only be isolated if the Greek spelling boundary naturally allows for it. You have to respect the governing morphology of the Greek word.
Explain the morphology. How does epsilon iota alpha break down?
Look at the structural components of Philadelphia. The final two letters are iota alpha, IA. The epsilon that precedes them physically belongs to the Greek root word form. It acts as the grammatical connective tissue for the Greek structure itself.
Okay, so the epsilon is busy.
Exactly. Because the epsilon is occupied by the Greek root, the final two letters, iota and alpha, are left completely unencumbered at the terminal end of the word. And what do iota and alpha perfectly correspond to?
They correspond exactly to yod and hey IA.
Exactly. The boundary law allows the epsilon to stay with its Greek host, which naturally isolates the terminal IA as a clean, valid, uncorrupted name witness. It perfectly satisfies both requirements. The orthographic boundary permits the isolation, and the scriptural text explicitly assigns the name custody function.
Philadelphia. The math actually works. But wait, hold on. If we're applying a universal mathematical rule here, I have a major problem with this.
What's the problem?
Because Laodicea, another one of the 7 churches in Revelation, also ends in that exact same EIA sound. Laodicea. If you can isolate the IA in Philadelphia, why doesn't Laodicea count? If the rule is universal, it feels like we're cherry-picking which Greek words we apply it to.
That is the ultimate stress test for the boundary law, and the source dismantles the Laodicea comparison mechanically. The comparison fails on both foundational requirements, the spelling boundary and the scriptural function. Let's look at the spelling boundary first.
Okay, let's look at it.
Laodicea's closing sequence is not an unencumbered epsilon iota alpha. It is governed by a completely different consonant cluster. The ending is kappa epsilon iota alpha, kia. How does the kappa change the math?
In Greek phonetics and orthography, the kappa is not just floating independently next to the vowels, it structurally governs that entire closing sound unit. A Greek consonant cluster like kia is a locked grammatical unit.
The law of custody dictates that you cannot violently fracture a governed unit. You cannot smash the key IA cluster, rip the IA out of the wreckage, and pretend it was standing cleanly at the terminal end of the word like it does in Philadelphia. The boundary prohibits it.
And we can actually see evidence of that locked cluster in the way it translated into English, right?
Yeah.
Because Philadelphia carried its IA over perfectly into English. Philadelphia IA.
Yes, exactly.
But Laodicea did not. English transliterated it as Laodic EA. The IA didn't survive the jump because it was trapped in the cluster.
Exactly. The structural reality persists across the transliterations. But even if a critic wanted to endlessly debate Greek diphthong mechanics, the Laodicea argument completely collapses on the second requirement, which is scriptural function.
Because what does Revelation say about Laodicea?
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't praise them for keeping the name.
Far from it. Laodicea receives the most devastating rebuke of all the churches. It is the lukewarm church. The text says it is about to be violently spat out. It possesses absolutely zero name custody function in the scriptural text.
So the framework is completely sealed. To cross the linguistic boundary into Greek, a word must possess both a clean terminal IA witness permitted by the orthographic boundary and an explicit scriptural function assigning it custody of the name.
Right. You can't just hunt for IA sounds and force the math to work.
Similar sounds do not equal structural identity. Philadelphia stands alone because it flawlessly meets both strict mathematical requirements.
Yes, it is mathematically isolated.
This entire framework is just astonishing. Let's synthesize the blueprints we've uncovered today so we can see the whole structure at once.
We began with the uncompromising law of custody. The original written letter count is the absolute first act of truth. Translations and pronunciations are secondary.
Which led us to isolate the two-letter source code of the name, Yod-He, or IA. A baseline confirmed by the historical testimony of Theodoret, anchored as the strong tower in Proverbs 18, and explicitly identified in Psalm 68.
We then watched that architectural foundation physically attached to human memory through the mandate of Exodus 3.15, generating the mathematical equation of Zechariah, ZKR plus IA, the memorial of IA.
We brought that same math to the concept of salvation. By refusing to let the phantom English H corrupt the count, we saw the 5 pure Hebrew letters of Isaiah, ISA plus IA, the salvation of IA.
We maintained the strict boundary of the count, refusing to let semantic dictionaries blur the lines between the 5-letter ISAIA and the 6-letter Yeshayahu.
And that rigid discipline paid off, because it allowed us to discover the salvation mirror. By mapping the mechanical hookback function of the Paleo-Hebrew Wa, Joshua revealed itself as the exact structural inversion of Isaiah against Iasa, the salvation of IA against IA enacts salvation.
Finally, we saw the architecture hold its structural integrity even when crossing into Greek. Philadelphia met the rigorous demands of both the spelling boundary and the scriptural function, preserving the terminal IA witness.
The entire system operates like a masterwork of structural engineering, hidden in plain sight right beneath the text. And that brings up a really profound implication that I want to leave you with today. Think about the historical texts you read, the ancient histories you study, the traditions you simply accept at face value.
Right.
We just spent a deep dive mathematically proving that a massive interlocking architectural mirror, Isaiah and Iasa, has been completely obscured from public view for centuries. And why was it hidden? Simply because someone added an English H.
Yeah.
Because a dictionary grouped 2 related words into the same entry. Because we culturally prioritize a modern pronunciation over the original physical letter count.
It forces a necessary and, slightly uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
How much more of human history, how much more ancient structural wisdom are we currently completely blind to simply because we've allowed the user interface to dictate reality, because we've forgotten how to count the original letters?
If an entire architectural network can be buried under a few layers of transliteration, what else is waiting in the source code? What other profound symmetries are out there, waiting for someone to stop listening to the river and start examining the stones? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it gave you that profound aha moment. Keep looking beneath the surface, keep questioning the interface, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.